This week on the podcast, we welcome activist, journalist, and author Christopher Rufo.
And the ultimate problem of critical race theory is that it's designed to serve the interests of the critical race theorists, the elite academics, the television commentators, the activist class on the left that harvests in donations and then buys mansions. But it doesn't have anything to offer working class people of any racial background, including and maybe especially working class or even lower class African Americans.
This is Walk-Ins Welcome with Bridget Phetasy. I'm Bridget Phetasy, and you are welcome. You know the drill. Please subscribe, rate, comment, share, reach out, tell your friends, send smoke signals, whatever. We love your feedback and we want to hear from you. If you like our work and want to support us, the best way to do that is join Phetasy.com. You'll get access to behind-the-scenes content, outtakes, discounts on merch, and the ability to submit questions for some of our upcoming guests. Support your favorite scrappy little internet heroes at Phetasy.com. All right, I'm with Chris Rufo, everybody. Welcome to Walk-Ins Welcome.
It's great to be here.
I'm excited to talk to you about your book. It's your first book, correct?
Yep, book number 1.
Yeah, and tell us the title and just a brief overview of what it's about for my listeners.
Absolutely, yeah. The book is America's Cultural Revolution: How the Radical Left Conquered Everything. It debuted last week as the number 1 bestseller across all categories on Amazon.
Wow.
And it in essence tells the story of the left's long march through the institutions. So it begins in the kind of turbulent summer of 1968 and then culminates in the turbulent summer of 2020, the George Floyd riots. And what it does is it shows the movement of kind of radical left-wing ideas from the fringes and the counterculture as they slowly take over institution after institution, to the point where in 2020, I think many of us felt like, wait a minute, all of our institutions are totally bought into BLM ideology, critical race theory, gender ideology. And so the book is really an attempt to show exactly how that happened, to trace back the origins, and then to show how these ideas gain power over time.
Yeah, it's very well researched. I was really impressed with, it's funny. I'll just be totally honest. I was like starting to read it, and I looked at my husband. I'm like, I feel like I've read the same book 100 times. And then I started reading yours, and it's not the same book. There have been a lot of books about like what's happening to the West in the past, because there is something happening. But I feel like you actually really went down the rabbit hole of trying to uncover and discover what the ideas that led us here. And that's different than any of the other books I've read.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm glad that you recognize that right away. And there's, unfortunately, I wish this weren't so, but there are 2 kinds of conservative books, let's say, or political books that aren't on the left. And there's a whole vein of these mass market, political books that are, they feel like they were dashed off and written in a month. The citations and footnotes are all just news articles from the last year, and you can kind of burn through them, and it feels like a very long, like opinion column.
Yes.
And you're just like, oh, okay, I get it. Okay, I find, but you feel like at the end of the read, it's like, man, I just kind of inhaled cotton candy, and it may have had its moments, but there's not much left. And so what I wanted to do, and probably a surprise for many of your listeners and many of the people who've engaged with my work, they see me as the right-wing firebrand, launching rhetorical attacks against critical race theory. They may have caught snippets on Fox News or 180 characters on Twitter. And I think a lot of people, the response of ours is like, wow, you've treated these characters sympathetically. You've done kind of immense original research, and then you tell a story in a way that's not just persuasive, but actually sophisticated as far as the craft of the writing. And so, for me, that was so fun. It's just a great thing to do, and I wanted it to be something that is lasting, not just a temporary kind of book that dies, and 30 minutes after it's launched, it's already dead.
Yeah.
It's something that I want people to be reading for years to come.
Well, it was interesting too, because as I was saying this to my husband, I was reading the introduction, and then I literally, the next line I read was how the ideology has really ended us all in kind of this nihilism. And I was like, and he's like, maybe we need to pivot. He was joking, like, maybe we just need to pivot out of the culture stuff, because I know I'm burned out on it, but I know I'm not alone. There's so many people, even just like normies, who are, like you say, kind of just trying to raise their kids, and like many of us talk about, and they're just like tired of all of the stuff. Although I will say, having a child, I've realized I can't really disengage from it either. So there does feel at this moment, as we head into another election, just like an overall sense of, I don't know, maybe you have a different sense of it, but my sense is people are just like, I don't want to have to do this.
Yeah, like, make it go away, please.
Make it stop.
I think that is right. I think that the attitude is one of exhaustion. People are at their wits' end. I think in the last 2 years, we've really successfully mounted an intellectual counterattack against critical race theory. Even the critical race theorists themselves, in recent conference appearances and such, have admitted to somewhat of a defeat as far as the public debate goes. The problem, however, and the reason why you can't just be exhausted and retreat to your own private sphere, is that these ideas are still in positions of institutional and administrative power. And so there's really no getting away from it once it is more than just a narrative in the media or an argument in the academic journals. This is embedded in your corporation's DEI office. This is embedded in your child's K through 12 curriculum. This is embedded in other institutions that are meaningful to you, that shape your daily life. And so, without being too dramatic about it, there is really no escape by retreat. It has to be a process in which we all move through it, and move against it, but also move past it. And that said, it's not hopeless. I'm actually very optimistic, very hopeful. And one of the lessons that I learned in doing the research for the early part of this cultural revolution, in 1968, which was analogous to 2020, just 4 years later, Richard Nixon wins a 49-state landslide, the biggest electoral win ever since. And so, to me, the lesson there is that the country can actually we're still a young country, we're still an adaptive country, we're still a very flexible country in a lot of ways. And so the culture can shift very fast.
Yeah.
The culture can shift away from these ideas, but it requires many of us, at the very minimum, to work hard to try to get it there.
Yeah. I know I've been accused many times of being kind of like a wishy-washy fence sitter, and some of that criticism is fair. I would say people I'm not really in the IDW because I wouldn't consider myself an intellectual, but I get so lumped in with that group, and I know I take in enough of the culture wars to see how absolutely useless activists on the right and the left consider people who are kind of trying to hold some kind of classical liberal line. Do you think it's impossible to hold that line of being a classical liberal, or do you have to be a radical?
I mean, there's a couple ways to look at that, and I think that I've looked at that as I think that we have a two-party political system, and there are only two avenues to achieve political power in the United States. There is the political left and the political right. And everything else is a fringe party, distraction with no viable theory of political change. Libertarians have no viable method for achieving libertarian ends, given the political nature of the status quo. And I think that the so-called classical liberals, or the so-called IDW, is also caught in that position. And I know many of these people. I respect and admire and consider many of them, even personal acquaintances and friends. But they have to ultimately make a decision if they want to actually have a viable theory of influencing the culture and even of conforming that culture to classical liberal ideals. And so you have to, at the end of the day, make a decision. And you can make a decision to say, hey, I opt out of the politics. I want to be a pure intellectual observer. I don't want to seek any kind of political change, but I want to be a more dispassionate, kind of rational, scholarly figure. That's fine. There's a place for that. But what I think is ultimately splintered the IDW and in a sense kind of erased it as a political force is that people started to understand that these political questions require pragmatic choices. And some of the IDW, like I think obviously Ben Shapiro started there, but even Dave Rubin and Jordan Peterson, I think recognized that necessity and said, well, we're going to kind of hitch our wagon to the political right and then try to achieve political victories while influencing the direction of those victories towards let's say a classical liberal ideal. And there have been others who have been unwilling to make those decisions or even actually exclusively signal against the right in order to be kind of the acceptable to center-left opinion makers. And to me that there's really no, and I always ask them, okay, great, well, please share with me your method for influencing the political left to become, to advance a classical liberal line against CRT, against DEI, against affirmative action. Explain to me exactly how that process would work of persuading the left to make those political decisions and translate them into concrete legislative and policy outcomes. And of course, I mean, that can't be done. It's impossible. So I just think there's a basic necessity of decision making, and I don't think it can be avoided for long.
Yeah, I think that's true. The problem is you have people who can't just hold their nose and vote for somebody like Trump, which I don't begrudge them that. So you're asking people once and forever in the country to kind of choose for this like lesser of two evils, which I also think people are exhausted by. And instead of making that choice, a lot of the times they'll just opt out completely, like you said, and they won't, it's not like we have massive voter turnout in this country. There's a large portion of people who just decide not to vote. And I don't know how you persuade those people to abandon the principles they might have about the character of somebody that they're voting for, to just let that go and, make this choice. I think that's always, I know internally this is something I always feel conflicted by, where I can recognize that this is a two-party system. I can recognize that there's very little that I can do to persuade the left other than maybe be like a conduit for people who might be feeling like I understand what it's like because I come from the left. I believe, were you at one time on the left or of the left? Mm-hmm. So
yes.
I totally understand that the defensiveness you run into in your own self, but I'm not sure the right has made it easier for people who might be willing to come over.
Yeah, I mean, certainly that's absolutely true. I would concede that happily. But I would say though, in my view, you have like a DeSantis figure, and look, Trump is a totally unique phenomenon in American politics. He's a totally singular personality. There's nobody like him, and so I understand. I didn't vote for Trump in 2016. I did vote for him in 2020. But I really do understand, even from my own personal experience, why people would be hesitant to vote for Trump because of their, personal feelings or analysis of him as an individual human being. I get it, and I certainly wouldn't begrudge people who just can't do that or wouldn't want to do that. But to me, a more interesting question is, okay, well, what about Governor Ron DeSantis? Governor DeSantis is much more of a classical liberal in the policies that he has implemented in Florida than anyone on the left or the right. Governor DeSantis understands these culture war problems, as they were perhaps analyzed originally or ferreted out by even the IDW type, centrist intellectuals. And he's advancing a concrete agenda to reverse the process of ideological capture, to restore balance to public institutions, and to protect people against some of these hostile and nihilistic ideologies.
Yeah.
And so that to me is a much more interesting question. And for me, that is in some sense a litmus test. Okay, all right, let's take Trump out of it. Would you vote for DeSantis?
I've said publicly that I would.
No, I'm not saying you. I'm not saying you particularly. I'm saying in general.
In general, yeah.
In general, I think it's a good test because that to me is a pragmatic question that can be answered with much more ease. And that to me is the ultimate statement. And you, obviously Dave Rubin and a number of other these folks, I think, Jordan Peterson as well. I think that is a responsible decision that can be made. And if you're unwilling to make that a decision, if like the Bulwark people, all these other folks, DeSantis is just as bad as Trump. He's worse than Trump. He's more dangerous than Trump. He's a totalitarian dictator in the making. It's like the people who feel that way. It's like, all right, if you are saying I'm anti-woke, but I'm also anti-DeSantis, I mean, get the fuck out. You're not serious. You're not serious about one of those things. One of those opinions is not a serious position.
Yeah.
So to me, that is the ultimate test. Yeah.
I agree. And I've said, Nick Gillespie was interviewing me and asked me, and he had said something about how he was like, do you feel that he's homophobic? And I was kind of like, I haven't seen any of this. And then literally the day the interview came out, that stupid ad or whatever that he put out. And I was like, oh, maybe, because I've read a lot and I've listened to him. And then that came out and I was like, okay, well, this doesn't, maybe I am wrong about him. I don't know if I can't figure out if he's trying to get independence or if he's trying to like run right of Trump and get the Groiper. I'm not sure exactly who that's trying to attract or if it's just. So that was a moment where I was like, I take it back. Sure. I won't vote for him because I actually think he's pretty measured and very smart. And that I saw something recently, like most people are concerned about economics on the right, on the left. And if you're running on this kind of populist culture war, it's not really going to capture what most people are concerned with in this moment that could obviously change very quickly. So I wonder if he can appeal to like the independents who would perhaps even like classical liberal boomers I know
totally
would be willing to vote for him until they see some stuff like that. And then it gets picked up by it's like chum for the left-wing media. And now suddenly they're like, oh no, I'm going to be a homophobe. And because look, I think most of us who have been around long enough, it's like I've heard since I was 20 years old that every conservative running was the next dictator or Hitler. So that like means nothing to me anymore. But when I do see what kind of campaign they're running, I start to get a little bit unsettled and go, well, maybe I'm wrong.
Sure. Yeah, no, I understand that. And look, I think that what I would suggest is listen to the candidate, look at the candidate's record, observe the candidate, the words that come out of the candidate's mouth. And that ad was not a good ad. It was totally ill-advised, ill-conceived. But my suspicion, without any inside knowledge, is that someone within the campaign or associated with the campaign or a vendor to the campaign put that out to be kind of like a Zoomer edit, the Giga Chad the video without actually, realizing how it would be perceived at the end of the day. I think it's a misstep.
Yeah.
I would expect that the campaign won't be putting out content like that. But to me, that's like some staffer screwed up.
Yeah.
And the staffer is either gone or will never do that again. That's how I kind of read it and look at it. But if you look at the policy and the question as well, is DeSantis able to appeal to independents? One data point is that, well, he just ran for re-election, 6-7 months ago, or 7-8 months ago now. And he went from a very narrow victory, less than 1% margin in 2018, He was attacked viciously by the media on COVID, on Disney, on gender in schools, on critical race theory, all of these issues that became his signature issues. And then the voters in Florida gave him an astonishing 20-point margin of victory. He won all of he had a kind of record turnout. He was winning Latinos, he was winning women, he was winning younger voters, older voters. He even won Miami-Dade County, which is the most urban county in Florida. And so he doubled down on all of these issues. He advanced a very concrete policy on these issues. He turned Florida into an economic powerhouse and really expanded the growth, especially by protecting it from lockdowns more than any other governor. And the voters rewarded him. And so my reading of the primary, if we want to kind of say, okay, well, does that translate into the primary? It's not that Republican voters don't like DeSantis. It's that a lot of Republican voters love Trump.
Yeah.
I mean, they have a deep personal commitment to Donald Trump as a human being.
Yeah.
And so in one sense, that's why Trump has 50%. Because, I mean, he has this remarkable ability to get this loyalty from his base. But, however, one bright side, and some pundits are saying, Republicans don't want DeSantis' anti-woke, policy platform. Are you crazy? No, it's that if you look at the top three candidates, Trump, DeSantis, and Ramaswamy, actually, kind of surprisingly, those are the most three culture war first, anti-woke, doubling down on CRT, gender, all this stuff. And so that is now a 90% position measured today. The anti-woke movement is the majority position among Republicans. Kind of 9 out of 10 support a candidate that foregrounds those issues. And so from my point of view, as someone who works on these issues, tries to lead on these issues, we are seeing what could perhaps be a revolution within the political right, and it becoming an anti-woke party aligned with, of course, economic conservatives that foreground prosperity, economic freedom, et cetera. And to me, that's a very attractive political party. And I think that it could do very well if it has the right leaders at the top to attract voters.
So I know everybody kind of has a different definition depending on who you're speaking to. How do you define woke, as just for people listening? I know it's like one of those things that people can point to, but I feel like because it's so insidious and everywhere, and everyone, like I said, has a different definition for it, depending on what side of the spectrum you're on, depending on what your beliefs are. How, from your perspective, do you consider it? Define it.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly useful in identifying a phenomenon. I think on both sides, people know what you mean when you say it. I typically don't use it. I think that it has limited utility. But in the book, I actually don't use it once, very intentionally. I think it'll probably fade.
I did notice that.
Yeah, it will become kind of I think in 5 years or 10 years, it will seem almost like a slang term that you used in high school, that if you used it today, it would be a bit embarrassing. So I wanted the book to last, so I don't use the term. But what it means is actually pretty clear. It is a term that means, it refers to critical consciousness. So the idea that you can awaken your mind or your consciousness to the existence of systemic oppressions, and then you are hyper-vigilant or aware or awake to the threats of the oppressor against the oppressed. And so it's the Marxist idea of critical consciousness that is then merged with the African-American vernacular to be woke to something, to be woke to the oppressor. And so it becomes this slang term that has a basis in a Marxist term. And so in that sense, I actually think it's an accurate term. I think it's used in general pretty accurately. But at the same time, I wonder if it will be exhausted in the near future.
Yeah, it's interesting. We did a T-shirt many, many years ago, it feels like forever ago, but maybe it was only like 5 years ago. It was, you're not woke, you're annoying, is what I always used to say. I'm like, you're not woke, you're annoying. Just stop being annoying. Because I didn't want to even give it any credence. I just wanted to be like, you're just... Like, there's something about minimizing this, particularly when it came from like academic leftists.
It's the worst. Yeah.
So and then it jumped into like boomer vernacular, and I started seeing it on Fox, and that's when we discontinued the shirt. I was like, okay, this word's done.
Yeah, no, you can't. Yeah. Yeah, it's like when
Now
your
I sound like a
mom
boomer.
starts using the word woke. When you're, it's like, I know. It is, that is so true. And that's why I really try not to use it, but in certain contexts, I think it's still useful. I love the DeSantis catchphrase, where woke goes to die. I think that was a nice little campaign signature. But I do think that you can get a bit lost in the debate about terminology. So I like to ground some of the arguments in more specificity. I like to talk about the actual positions and the actual concepts and the actual ideas that drive what can collectively be known as woke. Because just because you delegitimize a term like woke, it doesn't mean you've actually won anything.
Right.
If you have a DEI department, but people are embarrassed to say woke, but they're still pushing all the DEI policies, you haven't really won anything. So
right.
My own strategy and my own work is to really focus on those tangible and concrete expressions and institutions and try to fight the fight on those terms.
Yeah, I have noticed, I've seen a couple of articles and things going around that they're firing more and more of the DEI people at these studios and at different corporations, James Lindsay was like, once you install these folks, you can't get them out. But this kind of goes against that idea that you can, in fact, fire somebody who's DEI. So perhaps the tide is turning, or maybe it's just a financial decision. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's a bit of both. I think first and foremost, we have been very successful in politicizing DEI, and in the sense of we have revealed DEI as a political institution and a political commitment, rather than a neutral and bureaucratic mechanism for achieving commonly shared visions of the good. So DEI has become poisoned in the public mind, much in the same way that critical race theory had become poisoned in the public mind. And this is part of a deliberate campaign against it, to polarize, to kind of increase the awareness of the true nature of DEI, to turn it into a polarized political issue, and then to attack it rhetorically, and then attack it as a matter of policy. That's been my big campaign this year. I started it in January. And I've successfully worked with political leaders in Florida and Texas to actually abolish all DEI departments in all of their state universities. And so we've shown that we can do it there by using public policy to abolish DEI in state institutions. And simultaneously, because of the economic forces, and I think because the stranglehold of BLM ideology has loosened, corporations, including very kind of California, Silicon Valley, culturally very lefty corporations, are also shedding DEI jobs at a very rapid clip. And I had lunch with a friend of mine, a supporter of mine, who was a C-suite executive at a very large tech company. It's now a kind of well-known venture capitalist. And I said, hey, what's happening in the corporate world on these issues? He said to me, economic reality is returning. Interest rates have increased. Venture capital investment has tightened. Corporate economists are forecasting an economic slowdown. Mm-hmm. And every CEO in the industry knows that the first jobs that need to go are DEI, because they don't produce anything valuable. They don't create any products or services, and they actually harm the profitability and the effectiveness of their companies. All of them know this, even the ones that were spouting their support for DEI during 2020. And this very smart, very savvy person said, as soon as they can make the economic case for dumping these jobs, they're going to dump them. And so my job as an activist is to try to accelerate that, to try to create legitimacy for that, to try to create political pressure towards that end. And my personal goal is to throw the DEI industry into such great turmoil, to make the job prospects seem so dismal, and then to kind of wreck their reputation in the public mind, and create kind of political hostilities, that it puts real pressure on the industry as a whole, not just this piecemeal campaign against it.
So, like in Texas and Florida, on what grounds can they abolish the DEI in the universities?
Well, these are public universities only, so private universities can do what they wish, but public universities are governed by the state, they are funded by taxpayers, and ultimately they're under the authority of state legislators. So the people, through their state legislators, can reform, restrict, or reorient their public institutions toward whichever values that they choose. And so legislators are well within their right to say the people have decided that DEI should not be a priority, and in fact, DEI is detrimental towards scholarship, towards the production of knowledge, and towards the true mission of the universities. It's been abused by political activists for too long, and we are no longer going to be funding those initiatives. We are going to be defunding those initiatives using the power of the purse, which is, of course, the key legislative power. And so that's what they did. They simply said in a bill, no money will be spent on initiatives, X, Y, and Z, kind of defining and stipulating what that means. But that's a basic democratic function. And so I think that while some people are instinctively a bit alarmed by this, oh my gosh, you have to fund DEI, or somehow it's an infringement on liberty to not give your money to political activists who hate you. I think that in time, people will understand that this is a basic, normal part of democratic politics, and in fact, to say that the public does not have the right to restrict this is a form of tyranny, because you're saying that the public does not have to have the right to regulate the government, which is, of course, the complete opposite of what you want in a free and democratic society.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess I worry. The only thing I worry about is that it then makes the ideas more, it's like, ooh, tantalizing. It makes, do you know what I mean? Like when you say this thing is something that we're not going to teach, or this is off limits, it then suddenly gives it this like allure that the kids are like, oh, it must be cool then.
Yeah, I don't think so, for a couple of reasons. One is, look at, smoking, for example. The past stricter laws restricting smoking, and then smoking rates go down, even among kind of youth. If you look at, there was a big fight in school curricula over intelligent design or kind of evolution in schools. It's not that, that was restricted from the curriculum. And it's not that everyone is flocking to read, biblical accounts of creation.
Creationism.
That's not like the cool, And so, yeah, I mean, maybe among a certain subset, they'll say, hey, look, we're being suppressed, by big bad Ron DeSantis, and aren't we cool? But I have my oldest son is on the verge of being a teenager, and I talked to some of his buddies and friends, and I don't think DEI is going to be cool to the kids. I don't think that kind of racialist bureaucracy administering white privilege tests is going to be cool to really anyone that has any kind of independence or sense of rebellion. I actually think the opposite is true. I think that those kind of ideas and principles and bureaucracies are viewed increasingly by younger people as deeply uncool.
They are.
And certainly we should encourage that and encourage a sense of rebellion.
Yeah, I see definitely even in relatives' kids who are like 14, 18, and they've kind of come up in this like, they were online. It's interesting to hear them, but even yesterday I was talking to one of them and they were talking about Elon, and they're like, do you see what Elon's doing to Twitter? He's so woke. I was like, what? It was just so funny. Like, that's the perception of the 14-year-olds, that Elon's just this like woke guy. That I was laughing. I'm like, wow, Elon seems like he's kind of anti-woke, but to the kids, apparently he's being labeled woke, which I thought was hilarious.
That is like, and if you think about it, it's quite natural, because the DEI, CRT, white privilege, white fragility, shaming people because of their ancestry, affirmative action in college admissions that punishes people and rewards people, not on the basis of their accomplishments, but on the basis of their skill. I mean, it's so horrific and repressive and uncreative and stifling. I just can't see it being that exciting for people, and it seems horribly unjust.
Yeah.
In its own way. And so I've seen that even among my kind of kids' peers, and I remember one of my kid went to this like camp or something last summer, and the counselor, I think, was like a they them, and was making a big show about asking every kid their pronouns. It's like, oh my God, eye roll. And my son and his friends said, oh, everyone was rolling their eyes. That's so lame. We don't like this. And then my kid's buddy says, my pronouns are Walmart bag, which is just kind of a silly, stupid little thing. But the sense that the sarcastic, rebellious kids, the independent-minded kids, are really not persuaded by these ideas.
Yeah.
Not in the slightest. Yeah.
No, they don't. And they seem to like know how to play the game. I know for a couple of kids who are going into college this year, and the orientations at some of these schools are insane. It is crazy, the things they have to like sit through, and they were telling me about it as they're all laughing hysterically, joking about it, just like this thing they basically have to endure. And you hear people who work at corporations talk about this stuff where they're sitting through these long, HR. It's just like, it's weird how it isn't weird when I read your book, which is why your book I think is very important, how the institutions were so captured by all of this, and just everybody is suddenly now sitting through a DEI training and learning about their implicit bias and a lot of stuff that's kind of been proven as pseudoscience and
totally bonked.
Yeah. I didn't go through college or corporate world for many obvious reasons. And I don't think I would have made it either. I just think that my own spirit is too rebellious to endure a lot of those shenanigans.
Yeah, I graduated from undergraduate in 2006, and none of this was there.
Yeah,
I mean, it was. I mean, you had I had some ridiculous professor that was a kind of Foucault disciple. I had, there were lefty professors, and there were, but it was a rigorous education. There was representation from multiple perspectives. And even the professors who were really kind of out there, lefties, made a serious effort to engage with the discipline, engage with the scholarship, engage with the serious books, being open more or less to counterpoints. And there was certainly on the kind of training side, the kind of thought regulation, there was none of this.
Yeah.
And so I too think, wow, if I were having to go to college now, I would get expelled.
Yeah.
I mean, I would really not make it through 4 years. I could not sit there. I could not assent to this. I could not just put up with it and take it. Especially at that age, I could not do it. And I wonder how many brilliant kids that are going through the system right now, that it violates all of their conscience. It seems immoral. It seems unjust. And they're unwilling to compromise their own integrity and principles. And I wonder how many kids were really pushing out of that ladder to success, or that ladder to the established institutions. I think pessimistically, maybe we are not cultivating some of the best minds of the kind of rising generation, or perhaps maybe we'll see that these folks are seeking to build alternatives, and they're going to use their talents to create something better on the outside. And so I hope that the latter is more true than the former.
When I was reading your, I think it was just a little insert in your book, it said you were a journalist and an activist, which I found interesting because I always make fun of on the left, they have these journalists. I don't think they're honest about it. At least you call yourself, I've heard, a journalist and also an activist. And on the left, I don't think they're quite as frank about their intentions.
No, they deny it. Yeah.
So how do you No, it's totally fine. How do you reconcile? I guess for me, I was thinking, like, how do you reconcile those two things? As a journalist, I feel like you try to, be curious and open-minded and not, I feel like as an activist, you have to have a point of view, and you usually have a very rigorous point of view. And as a journalist, it seems almost like the opposite of an activist to me, but that could just be my limited take on it.
No, I mean, that's certainly one way of looking at it. I just, I look at it a different way, and for me, I'm politically engaged. I have political objectives, and then I also practice the craft of journalism. I make all of my pieces have journalistic rigor, but they are in service of a political goal and a political ambition. And in my view, what I always try to do is be very transparent about that, and to be very honest and open about it, even to the point of saying publicly, hey, I'm working on a new campaign. This is how I'm going to run it. These are my objectives. Here's kind of step 1, 2, 3 of how I hope to achieve it. And then part of those campaigns is often an investigative reporting series. And I found that to be very effective as a political tool. And in a sense, this is a return to the origins of American journalism. Journalism was in the early period of American history, even in the kind of progressive era, let's say, in the early 20th century. Journalism was highly opinionated, highly partisan, highly polarized. And so even those great muckraking reporters who did those kind of brilliant exposés in the early part of the 20th century were politically conscious and engaged and had political ambitions that drove their investigations. I often think that in many ways I'm very consciously doing both and combining both into a discipline that is exciting for me personally. I enjoy doing it that way. And I think that it's in distinction to some of our counterparts in the kind of mainstream press or the left press that is essentially doing the bidding of activism, but pretending not to be doing so. And to me, that's dishonest, and that's manipulative, and that discredits their own stated principles of being objective journalists that stick to the facts when they're not doing anything of the sort. And so I don't see any contradiction between the two. I actually think that they're quite complementary, as long as you are honest with yourself, first and foremost, and then honest with others. And so I find both of those. I would be unsatisfied if I were to be forced to pick one or the other. And so I found this nice combination of the two. I tailor it to my own desires and my own talents and my own interests. And I thankfully work for a number of institutions, most prominently Manhattan Institute, that understands what I'm doing, supports what I'm doing. We run an opinion journal, City Journal, that where I publish all my writing is an opinion journal, and so it's quite a thrill for me to be able to do a kind of political opinion work, but use journalistic techniques to substantiate the stories that I'm telling with new facts and new information.
Yeah, I did find that the thing that I liked about your book a lot is how charitable you treated all of the subjects. So you profile 4 subjects. Can you talk a little bit just about the 4? And I have a few questions about just like who was your favorite and who did you learn the most about, or who did you relate to the most, or upon reading their things, maybe understand, where they were coming from or relate to them. I'm just curious because that's interesting to me. I learned a lot about these people from this book.
Yeah, absolutely. I learned a lot about these people in researching it and writing it. Absolutely. And so I profile 4 figures, and these figures are representative of the strands of left-wing theory and left-wing activism and political practice. And I think that they're the 4 prophets of the New Left revolution that began in the 1960s that have had enormous influence, directly or indirectly, up until today. And it's Herbert Marcuse, the New Left philosopher that was really the father figure for the revolutions of 1968. It's Angela Davis, who was, of course, a revolutionary, kind of pioneered the political philosophy of Black Marxism, was the prototype designer of intersectionality, talking about race, class, and gender as something that had to be taken together, and then the direct mentor to the leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement. Third is Paulo Freire, who is a Brazilian neo-Marxist pedagogist, so a theoretician of education, that is extremely influential in graduate schools of education in the United States, and also the third most cited author in all of the social sciences in the academic literature. So a massive and although somewhat under-recognized influence. And lastly, Derek Bell, the Harvard law professor who was the father of critical race theory. He mentored all of the law students that founded the discipline of critical race theory, and so he's an important figure. And certainly glad that you have the comment of that it's approached sympathetically. In my view, there are kind of two styles of conservative books or even kind of center-right, center-left books. Those that are just kind of pure polemic that treat the opposition as a caricature or a punching bag or a straw man, and then they attack it, and it's in its way it's a kind of a condescension. Look how bad these people are. Okay, great. I mean, I guess that's one way of looking at it. Fine. But what do you really learn? I try to treat it quite differently. I tried to understand these people and these political movements first as they would understand themselves. And so I think that if you asked any of these four, although three of them are deceased, do I accurately summarize and describe their views before I engage in the criticism? I think they would say yes. Do I have even some sympathy for all four? Yes, they're human beings. While I disagree with them very strongly on political matters and practical matters, and ultimately arrive at a negative conclusion, a negative analysis, I strove to treat them as human beings and to understand them and really to understand what made their ideas attractive to other people in the first place. Because if they were simply rotten people with rotten ideas that had rotten outcomes, and there was no redeeming quality to them in any manner, they wouldn't be the subject of a book because no one would have paid attention to them in the first place. So I try to understand why these figures were so influential and take their ideas seriously and grapple with them quite seriously. And so, you spend a lot of time with people. I read all of their books. I read all of their letters. I read all of their correspondence and commentary. And so I think you can't really do that and come away with them in seeing them as a one-dimensional figure. You just can't do that if you're being, if you're engaging your human faculties.
Yeah, I think too. The reason I felt like you were approaching it charitably, or at least trying to understand where they were coming from, is there were moments where I think there was one where you were talking about Marcuse, and it was some of his writing, and he considered the United States a welfare state and a warfare state, I believe is what it was. And I was like, well,
it's not wrong. Yeah,
he's got a point.
Yeah.
And so I can see how these ideas would kind of capture the imaginations of particularly going into Vietnam and this disgruntled generation. So
it's very easy to see why many of these ideas were very attractive to people. I mean, and it's also, just from a matter of kind of measuring people, intellectually, right? We're intellectuals, we're talking about ideas, and I mean, all four of these figures are brilliant people. They have moments of brilliance. They have moments of lucidity and clarity and inspiration. And so you have to acknowledge that your enemies and your opponents are not just kind of flat evil,
right.
But actually they have moments of brilliance, and they have even lessons that you can learn from them. And so I sought to do so. Otherwise, and that's kind of when you read these other books that are just kind of these screeds, or look at all these terrible people, and you kind of think, wow, you spent a year or so, or maybe actually a much shorter time, but you spent a long period of time grappling with these ideas, and you came away with just a very pat narrative. It just doesn't seem very, very, very insightful or very curious or very open to to the true nature of things that are much more complex than even, to be totally honest, than the 30-second sound bites that you fire off on cable.
Yeah.
I love the 30-second sound bite. It's polemics, it's black and white, it's demanding action,
You're
it's
good
hyperbolic,
at
it. It's catastrophe. I mean, I love doing that. I'm good at it. It's a method of rhetoric that I find an art form in itself. But in a book-length work, you have to do more than just that. And so maybe people are surprised, because I think my reputation, which is kind of funny for me to think about from the outside of it, is Rufo is a fire-breathing, Fox News polemicist who does X, Y, and Z. And then I think people who see that side of me and then they read this, they say, oh, wow, this is a kind of a different person that comes across in the reading.
I was definitely surprised. I was expecting it to be more like, Breitbart's book, what's it called? The one, his like famous autobiography. That when I was reading it, people were like, are you snorting red pills? I'm like, it's just Breitbart. It actually was much more, what fascinated me about a lot of these characters that you profile is how disillusioned they became in many instances with their own movement, or in like Marcuse's, his movement kind of turned on him at the end. It seems like he wasn't left or radical enough, which I think also happens a lot to people in their position, where suddenly it's like, you're not doing enough, old man. We're ready to like go bomb the theaters. So who was the most surprising to you? What did you, of all the people that you were the kind of living with in their heads, who did you find to be the most surprising?
Oh, I mean, they all reveal surprises, but I would say that Angela Davis, for all of her faults, which are numerous, and for all the damage that she's done, which is significant, you have to admire her pure kind of intellectual capacity, and then also paired with her pure kind of physical courage. I mean, she was fighting, in my view, for the wrong ideas. She was fighting using the wrong methods. But you at the same time, you have to have a kind of qualified admiration for her willingness to go all the way in support of her ideals and her highest principles. And so you get that from her. I think Marcuse, I mean, is such a fascinating figure and the most insightful, the most brilliant, the most complex in his thinking. The most idealistic, the most utopian, and you read him and you see a man who, even into his advanced age, in his 70s, was still just totally alive with intellectual questions and political aspirations, and was grappling with the world around him, and engaging with politics in a very substantive way. I thought that he was in some ways the most inspirational and the most fascinating figure. And then on the other side, I think Derek Bell, the godfather of critical race theory, was just the most disappointing person. And the perfect, and I mean, just so dispiriting, so disillusioning. And this is a guy, and really I think the perfect symbol for where the revolution ends up in our time. And this is a guy who was a brilliant young man, emerged from the kind of working class, black community in Pittsburgh. His parents had of course, and grandparents had of course escaped really dire conditions in the Deep South. He's serves in the Air Force. He goes to law school, and then he starts working to desegregate schools in the Deep South. I mean, a really, truly noble cause. He runs 300 cases.
Wow.
For the NAACP. He desegregates these Deep South schools in the face of danger, in the face of public condemnation in the Deep South, in the face of real risks. He's fighting for these really poor, desperate people down there. And you get a sense of a kind of heroic sense of him as a young person. It's like, wow, that's a truly noble thing. He believed in colorblind equality. He believed in desegregation. He believed that blacks, even in the Deep South, should be pursuing this vision of integration toward the great American ideals of liberty and equality that were denied for so long, but were finally at hand. And that to me is still an inspiring vision. But then he goes through this process of total disillusionment.
What happened?
He's selected to become a law school professor at Harvard Law, and openly admits in his autobiographical work, he says, "I was not qualified to be a law school professor. I was essentially provided access to become a law school professor because of kind of de facto affirmative action mentality." And then many other people, like the great black economist Thomas Sowell said, what happened to Derek Bell is that he believed in the civil rights movement. He became disillusioned with it. He was selected through this process of affirmative action. He never felt like he was good enough for academia. He felt this sense of inferiority. He felt that he was never going to be able to fully integrate into this elite milieu because of those circumstances. And then he turned against his own philosophy and then advocated for a theory of racial pessimism and revenge. And then actually, paradoxically, he became famous the more pessimistic his writing became. He became acknowledged the more kind of paranoid and conspiratorial his point of view became. And then he also became solidified his own status the more that he turned against the great ideals of the United States. And so towards the end of his life, as he was helping, found the discipline of critical race theory, he said that the Declaration, the Constitution, Abraham Lincoln, the 14th Amendment, Brown versus Board, desegregation, and the Civil Rights Act we're all preaching equality, but in fact we're all preaching a false theory. And in reality, they were just American whites being more subtle in their pursuit of racism and discrimination. And he was a mentor to Barack Obama while Barack Obama was at law school. And even towards the end of life, he said, Barack Obama is essentially a black figurehead for a white supremacist society.
Wow.
Awful. And he said, we could be on the verge of black genocide, in which American whites are going to perpetuate a genocide against America. It's like, no, this is false. This is outrageously false, and just a kind of a moral turn from high ideals in his youth to just the most cynical and I think disgusting and false abdication of moral responsibility in his immaturity. And so I came away, and that's why I put him at the very end chapter, right? I think it's a perfect symbol. But it's like, come on, really?
That's pretty, some of that's very mainstream extreme, now, though. Yeah. I see it on a lot of because I have a list on Twitter, and I call it the sane people list, but it's not all sane people. And some of the people are very extreme on both sides, just because I like to be able to take the temperature on one of an event from left to right to center and get an idea. And some of the far left rhetoric is what you're describing. There's this idea that this is fundamentally just a racist country and it is irredeemable, and all of the progress we've made is just an illusion. And another way to kind of hold people back.
Yes.
And it's interesting because there's so much disdain for the middle class in Marcuse, and I can see why, because the middle class kind of flies in the face of this idea. It's not just white. It's a very diverse middle class that we have. And I think you're seeing a lot of what's interesting in this moment right now is seeing people from the middle class who might be, you see it with Muslim at the school boards and in Florida, you're seeing it when everybody who voted for Trump was white supremacists, even if they were from Latin America. And now they're having to reckon with the working class in a way that they didn't have to before. It's just
yes, and I think that's a very healthy thing.
Yeah.
Right? It's a healthy thing. Okay, that you should have the support of the broad middle class. That used to be a kind of agreed upon principle. Politicians would orient their campaigns towards, reflecting the values and serving the interests of the middle class. I think that's still probably a sound electoral strategy. But you're right. For however awful and corrosive and destructive the ideas of Derek Bell are, it's undeniable that they are still very influential, that they become the conventional wisdom for a large part of the modern left. And the ultimate problem of critical race theory is that it's designed to serve the interests of the critical race theorists, the elite academics,
right,
the television commentators, the kind of the activist class on the left that harvests in donations and then buys mansions. But it doesn't have anything to offer working class people of any racial background, including and maybe especially working class or even lower class African Americans. And so what I think of when I think of critical race theory is I spent 3 years working back and forth on a documentary that was in part based in a public housing project in Memphis, Tennessee. 100% African American, 100% below the poverty line. 92% of the families were single-parent families in that entire zip code, virtually 100% in the project. And so this is really, the people for whom the critical race theorists should be fighting or claim to be fighting. And so as I was looking at critical race theory and fighting against critical race theory, I kept asking myself, okay, let's see, what is their position? What is their solution? What are they proposing that we do? And does it have anything to offer those people that I met in the public housing project in Memphis? And every single time, the answer was no.
Mm-hmm.
They have nothing to offer those people.
Right.
They have, and in every case, you ask, well, does this serve their own self-interest, their own status, their own position within institutions? And guess what? The answer was always yes.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I was fighting against critical race theory, I was very cognizant of the fact that it's a high-risk fight. It's a very public fight, and it's in some ways a bit of a socially awkward fight, given how American culture works. To be, a young, how would they say it? A young, cisgendered, able-bodied, white male, fighting against critical race theory. It has its own cultural risks and limitations, but at the end of the day, what made me fight this fight with no defensiveness, no hesitation, and no insecurity was that even through the lens of kind of service to the intersectional hierarchy, right, which was their supposed ideology, it was a total dead end. And so I knew that I was fighting not just for people in the kind of social justice vernacular who looked like me, but actually for everyone. For every group in American society, I think that I was on the moral high ground. And so I think that would help me fight this fight with no fear of the labeling and the kind of insults and any kind of pushback, which was important. And I think one of the reasons why it was so successful.
Yeah, it's just you are effective. I definitely have been just observing as someone who's like constantly jokes about how ineffective I am. I'm not really trying to be effective. I really am I've stumbled into this and an observer of many of the things, but then I always say, nothing is kind of more radicalizing than having a kid. And suddenly I can't just be like the cool kid in the back of the class who's just high and laughing at everyone. Now I have to, I can't ignore it. I care about what the school system is teaching my kid. I care about what she's learning. I care about her having like a male who's pretending to be a woman as a camp counselor later in her life. It's just like suddenly these things become very tangible. And I care about having a very healthy, productive working class, because I think when what we're seeing being kind of masked by critical race theory and gender theory and all this stuff. It's like the politics of resentment are so seductive right now. There is this just seething class war underneath all of it. And it's easy to be sucked into that. It's just easy to start looking with envy at people who have more than you, which you're constantly subjected to on Instagram and all of these other social medias, and going like, well, where's mine? And more people, as they suffer economically, are going to start trending in that direction, which is why I think it's so important that some party takes the economic consideration seriously. But yeah, it's interesting to me right now because I think in terms of the culture stuff, you probably are like one of the most effective people on the right, and you manage to do it in a way that it is like a firebrand, but it's not, I don't know. It still feels grounded in something. It doesn't just feel like chum. So
yeah, and I think, you know, maybe one reason for that is that I mean there is a kind of conservative, you know, firebrand type that's prominent in media that is just like, in a sense, whatever the hot issue is, they have a hot take and they push the ideological line, and they have maybe a snappy talking point about it. But what I've tried to do is actually bring new issues to the table, to do substantive work on them, to remain focused on them over a long period of time, and then to actually offer real concrete solutions to these problems. And so there's a lot of work, like when people see a tweet or they hear a little clip, they're seeing the tip of the iceberg.
yeah.
But there's a lot of substantive work that goes underneath it. And I mean, I think you're more than just an observer. I think you're modest. I think that just by discussing these issues, raising them, being open to them, being open to different perspectives and grappling with them in public, is hugely important. And certainly not everyone has to kind of do it in the way that I do it, but I think that it does have an influence because people want to feel like listening to your show or like, okay, there are other people that are grappling with these same questions, that have the same reservations. I think that's an enormously useful function. And I would say to some of those folks, to elaborate on that theme is, you know, to the folks who say, you know, I maybe a request, because I know that a lot of these folks listen to you, is if you have hesitations about Republicans or Trump or you know, my rhetoric or whatever it might be, I would ask people to simultaneously recognize that ultimately the activism that I'm doing is designed to be effective given the reality and the status quo. I'm not doing it in the abstract realm of how society and the world should be or should work. And that ultimately I'm advancing a political project and a political cause that for the most part is probably aligned with where you think things should be going. And I would ask people to judge my work not against the well, if society were perfect and this were not necessary, this would be conducted in a different way, but actually a very pragmatic and a very practical and prudential consideration. Is this advancing politics towards a shared goal and a shared objective? And I think that we'd have much more productive disagreements and much more productive relationships, because there is a faction that drives me insane, where I feel as if I am working in a sense on their behalf, advancing the interests that they say that they have, but that I'm getting constantly, you know, attacked as a kind of enemy to the right. And I suspect that a lot of that is not a substantive critique of what I'm doing, but it is to shore up, in some sense, their own position in the media ecosystem as, you know, I'm a thoughtful center-right person. I'm not one of the culture warriors, you know. And I just think that you know, if it's for kind of that purpose, I don't respect it. But if it is genuinely for a tactical or strategic means, I would just hope that people look at it in a slightly different way. They might have a slightly different conclusion.
What is something that you've changed your mind about?
I mean, everything. I think you said, like, we can no longer be the stoned high school kid sitting in the back of the class laughing at everyone. I mean, I was that kid also.
Yeah.
So from that to being on the left, and then traveling around the world as a documentary filmmaker, which was the first 10 years of my working life. To then becoming, shifting to the right, becoming more conservative, and so I think my position and my beliefs on so many issues have changed dramatically. Having kids, having a family, trying to figure out how you fit in now with all of these other responsibilities. What hasn't changed is a better question.
Yeah.
It's a better question. It's a shorter list.
Yeah, that was what's interesting too about just the people you kind of profiled in your book, is just seeing their ideological evolutions as they changed and sometimes didn't change or drastically changed. It's just the nature, I think, if you're a thinking, living person, that happens, but unless you're Bernie Sanders.
And God bless Bernie Sanders.
God bless him. I love him.
At least he's consistent.
At least he's consistent. We can count on Uncle Bernie.
He will always be, terrorizing you about the labor theory of value at Thanksgiving or whatever.
Exactly. And what's something you've been wrong about?
Well, part of my activism, I try to avoid ever admitting my wrongs, but I would say that I have made some rhetorical missteps on occasion. I have put emphasis on kind of in a way that wasn't effective or maybe wasn't ideal. And so, look, I've gotten in fights. I've gotten in a couple petty squabbles that, looking back, I wouldn't do again. I think when I was first reporting on gender and sexuality, I didn't have enough of a background knowledge on some of these issues, that I stepped on some landmines that were exploited by some of my opponents. Mm-hmm. And so, I think I've even kind of pushed policies that weren't designed for the moment. And so I look back at a lot of different, failures, missteps, wrong conclusions, and I guess it's part of it, right? You can't be right all the time, and you try to not let those things damage you too much, and then you have no other choice but to keep moving, and to adjust. I try to avoid admitting publicly in grand fashion, confessing my mistakes and providing an opening for my opponents, but at the very least, privately, I acknowledge them, mm-hmm. And then I always try to improve.
Yeah, I had a guest yesterday, and he was talking about how kind of the fastest way to success is failure, essentially, because the quicker you can get over the humiliation and ego and be okay with failing, the faster you'll learn the lessons you need to learn and improve. So I liked that take. It got me. I mean, I've been wrong about so many things. I think when you talk in public like we do, I try to shy away from predictions, but there were some that just, I'm like, oh, I was surprised there wasn't a red wave too. I was surprised. I thought Trump was going to win again for sure. Was wrong about that. Maybe. Just kidding.
The predictions are hard. The predictions are very hard.
And I think too, it made me realize, it makes me view my own bubble that I'm in as much as I try to get outside of my bubble, that I am in a bubble of my own. And I don't know. It's just we live in interesting times, and
that's right. Yeah.
I ask the same two questions at the end of every podcast. What is your biggest defective character? I know you don't want to admit any wrongness, but...
Oh, no. I mean, this is a very easy thing. And if I didn't answer this truthfully, my wife would beat me up after the podcast. Vanity is one of the one of the 7 deadly sins that I'm probably most susceptible to. That's my character flaw that I'm working on,
So funny. I wouldn't have guessed that, but that makes sense. My husband has a similar one. Like, he jokes, we met in recovery, and he always jokes that even when he was like a tweaker, he would make sure that he ate enough because he learned that that's like how you end up losing your teeth. And he would like brush his teeth and make sure that he was eating. He's like, I was the only guy on meth who was like, all right, I got to go eat now just so I can like not lose my teeth.
And brushing his teeth?
Yeah. He's like, my vanity's always saved me from like being overweight or losing my teeth, or it's just funny. I'm like, well, it has an effect.
In a small dose, in a small dose, a moderate dose, vanity can actually be healthy.
Yeah.
But
what's your biggest asset?
Oof, I mean, my biggest asset, I think, in the context that we're talking about, in politics, is I think I have a narrative capacity and a verbal capacity that is something that's very unique on the political right, and that has demonstrated an ability to move people and reach people and persuade people and then drive action. And so, one thing that I learned in some of my own career failures, like my documentary days that were a kind of mixed success, but some big failures along the way there, is you're much better off doubling down on your kind of strengths than on trying to shore up or improve your weaknesses. Mm-hmm. And so what I do, and I try to do, is say, all right, well, I'm like good at one thing. I'm good at the thing we're talking about. And so how can I just spend all of my time doing that one thing and getting even better at it? And then not doing the other things where I'm not as talented or as I might imagine I am. And so I think that, that's the thing that you have to figure out when you're growing up is, what is your gift or your talent or your greatest asset? And then how can you use that as many hours in the day as possible and really make that thing worthwhile? And I think ultimately that's how you contribute to the society that you're living in. And so I hope that I can use that in the years to come and make that contribution.
Do you think you'll ever be run for office?
No, I did actually run for office briefly and totally catastrophically one time when I was living in Seattle. And I put my hat in the ring for office, and I got my ass handed to me immediately. I got kneecapped by the media. I got intimidated by the activists that threatened me, and then I mean, it was and I realized very quickly, oh my God, I am not cut out for this. And so I dropped it, and it was a big embarrassment, a big humiliation, a big failure. But to your point that you made earlier, it's like, wow, I failed miserably. I got humiliated in public all within a 6-week time period. But now looking back, I also learned everything there is to know about politics, and it started me on this new path that has been so fun and so successful. So some of your biggest failures you're actually grateful for.
Yeah.
Because they were your biggest teachers.
Mm-hmm.
And so while of course I don't want any more big failures in my future, we work hard to avoid them. I'm ready that in case there is one, I'm ready for there to be a good lesson on the other side of it.
Yeah. Well, this has been great. Thank you so much for coming on, and great job on the book. I hope everyone checks it out. Tell people where they can find you and your book.
Yeah, America's Cultural Revolution debuted last week as the #1 bestseller across all categories in Amazon. It's available anywhere books are sold, and there's an audiobook version as well with a great narrator. So I like to say that the kind of pitch is, if you want to be 6 months to a year ahead of all the political conversations that are about to happen, buy this book. Be the smartest person in the room, and be ahead of 99.9% of all the people that are talking politics. I do think it's helpful too, and I recently wrote this piece for Spectator about what happened to Pride, and I think the average person looks at just a lot of this stuff and they're like, oh, Pride is suddenly kids are a pride parade and conservatives are burning rainbow flags. It's very black or white, just from a normie perspective who doesn't really understand a lot of the stuff that you discuss in the book. It's like, who has time for all this? Well, you have time, and I'm glad you wrote a book about it so that people can kind of understand some of the ideology behind what they're maybe having to step up and fight at their school board or identify, because it always goes from
no, CRT isn't in our schools. So like, well, it's not, to then tacitly admitting that it is, to then saying they're banning it. It's just like, wait, I thought you said it wasn't here. Now conservatives are banning it. It's just a very, very quick transition we made from this doesn't exist. So I think that for people who are trying to comprehend what the F, this would be a good place to start. And it's a good, like you said, you do have a gift for the narrative arc. It pulled me through it. You know, it was like you did a good job of telling the story.
I appreciate that.
So congratulations on the success of it. And now get back to work. Just kidding.
I will. Yeah, I appreciate it. And I appreciate the time. And it's been fun to talk to you.
Thanks. It's time for the weekly check-in with Bridget and cousin Maggie.
Okay.
I'm just texting people randomly, do you know any good drivers in Boston? And I mean like people who can pick me up, but they think it's like a joke about driving in Boston. And they're like, no.
Right. We're looking for a way to get from the airport to our home.
Yeah.
That's really funny.
So people are like, no, I don't know any
You're
good
like, is
drivers
this
in
the
Boston.
setup to a joke?
Yeah. I was like, random question. Do you know any good drivers in Boston? They're like, I know one. He taught me how to drive stick. I'm like, no, not that kind of driver. I probably should have been more clear.
Yeah, we're trying to get prepped for our vacation. I can't believe it's like next week too. I think I'm in denial about that.
It's even weirder because I was just there.
Yeah.
So
You were just in and out and then now you're going back.
yeah, now I'm prepping to go back. It felt like I like appeared in like a time warp
Yeah.
or like
A wormhole.
yeah. It felt like a wormhole appearance. I did a lot too in like 36 hours.
Yeah.
Really made the most of it. But yeah, I need a break. Excuse me.
Yeah, like a real vacation.
Yeah.
I know. I'm like, we really do need to take time off too and like shut it down and not have it be like a working vacation.
No, I feel like this one is a good enough length that we can do that. It's like 12 days.
Right. It's not too long, but it's not too short. And I do feel like if we can get our shit done, get enough prepped that we really kind of can take the time.
Yeah, I just really want to spend time with the fam. And I don't know, she's old. It's fun to take. I'm really excited to take her back at this age because she's like at a very insane age and a monster, but she's also, I think it'll weirdly be easier in a lot of ways than last year because she was so young. She was just a newborn. She was like 4 months old.
Yeah.
And going to the beach was like lugging all this stuff, and she couldn't really do anything because she couldn't even sit up at the time yet. And
yeah,
so,
she just had to lie in that little thing.
Yeah, and look around, which she loved, but it was very challenging for me. And now she'll be able to run around with her cousins, and we can go pick berries. She's eating. We can go pick berries.
Right.
We can go to the like petting zoo, that little goat farm. So I'm excited. I think she'll just be like, what the heck?
Yeah.
Like the boats and
All the people and the kids.
she's been,
all the kids.
Mm-hmm. We take her to do stuff here, but it's been just hot and like she's in like a good routine, but I think it'll be good to like blow her mind a little bit.
Yeah. It'll be fun.
Yeah, and she's old. Like even the last flight we took, she was able to be like, "What the fuck is happening?" When she was looking out the window, it was like you could see she was like, "What is going on?" So that's exciting. Every little bit older that she gets, it's more like, you know, the miracle and wonder of flight through the eyes of a child. It's so weird because I just took 4 flights in like 2 days. You know, it's a short trip when I landed and went to bed and woke up and it was time to check in for my flight.
Wow.
For my next flight. I was
Yeah.
like,
Your flight
damn.
out. Yeah.
But it's this weird, I don't know if it's just become courtesy or if it's just a general lack of wonder about flying, but no one opens their windows when you land or take off anymore.
It is weird. I've noticed that on planes. I think it's both. Like, I think on one hand, it's kind of courtesy and kind of feeling like, oh, they've put all the shades down for a reason. Like, I don't want sun shining on my neighbor, or like, you know, like in planes now, they didn't always used to do it where it was like, oh, please close your shade when you leave the plane.
Oh, now they
kind of
do
request
that.
it of you.
Well, because it's so hot. So now they do it as a way to like keep the plane cool, particularly in places like Texas, Phoenix, anywhere in America at the moment. But particularly places where it's very hot. They're like, we need to keep the plane cool for the next people. So please put your windows down. But I've been in some planes where they ask you to open the windows for takeoff and landing. And then they'll have you shut them again.
I wonder if it's just like the fact that, you know, people don't want to like rock the boat or like one hand or the other, where it's like if they're closed, they just want to leave them closed and don't necessarily want to be the one who's opening their shade. But also I feel like there is less wonder about, I remember as a kid being like, are we taking off? Like, let's look out the window, you know, like just like being so enthralled by that.
I'm still enthralled by it.
I know.
I still want to see, and especially after the last time that we like all the blinds were shut, and I knew that we were kind of making our descent, but it feels like sometimes you go barreling into Austin, like it's a pretty quick descent generally, and I wasn't really paying attention. They're like, oh, we're gonna make our descent, and I must have just spaced out for a half hour or something. The next thing I knew, it was like boom, and we landed, and I was like, what the fuck? I like need to see how close to the ground we are. It scared the crap out of me.
Yeah, you were like, did we just hit something in midair?
No concept that we were landing. I didn't know that. I just was wondering about that as I was flying. Because everybody's like on there. And I was wondering too if it's the rise of devices. So it's hard to look at your device if you have backlight.
Right.
And now that every single person on the plane has a device.
Right. And just like the screens on the seats and stuff like that.
No one wants to have their...
Yes, the wonder of flying is a little bit worn off.
Well, I don't think the airlines make it any easier to appreciate the wonder of flying now that they've crammed everybody in there like sardines, and they squeeze every dollar out of you, even while they're being subsidized by the government, so that they can then socialize their losses when the shit hits the fan.
You know a lot more about this than I do.
It's just such a hard industry.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's they like a perfect example of this industry and how they value your time. And it really is a reminder that the true wealth is being able to buy time. Because if you're just a pleb in a coach seat, and like what happened to me the other day, my flight got delayed, and automatically now they'll start like rebooking you on flights while you're flying in the air
for your connection.
Your connection. And I was like, should I try and make that flight? And the guy next to me is like, I don't know. I trust the like algorithm that if it's offering you other options, you're probably not going to make that flight. And we didn't. We landed as that flight was taking off. So I made the right decision to try and book one of those flights, but I don't trust the algorithm because I went to go look for direct flights from Minneapolis to Austin, which was where my connection was. And there was a flight on Delta at 11 o'clock, which would have been the next direct flight. And they didn't even offer that. And there were seats for sale on this flight, and they didn't even offer it as an option because they knew that they could get the $600 for that one way instead of but they didn't even offer it as an option. Like I would have paid the difference just to get home.
They were redirecting you to like 3 different flights.
No, I would have had to fly to Columbus, Ohio, and then Atlanta, and then back to Austin,
which is insane.
And made it home at 7 instead of when I was supposed to be home at noon. I'm like, you guys fucked up and didn't this. It was the stupidest reason we were delayed. They're like, oh, something was in the way and we moved. I don't even really understand what the delay was, but they didn't have all the bags on the plane. Our flight left at 6 a.m. Like, how are you not?
Right.
This isn't like,
this is like first flight of the day.
Yeah, what are you doing? So I was like, and I picked that flight thinking like, generally it's like
not a lot's gonna go wrong,
weather or mechanical. Not whoops, like we blocked the door to the bags and couldn't find the key to the car. It was something so dumb. And so then they're like loading the bags, and every minute that goes by, I'm like, I'm not going to make that fucking connection. And you would think that they would just put me on the next available connecting flight.
Right.
Direct flight that would get me in a couple hours later.
But
nope.
No.
And this is the airlines at their worst.
Yeah.
And so then I was on the plane like the mom from Home Alone, just trying to I was like, I have to get back. I don't want to go 3 days without seeing her. It's the longest I've gone. I'm still breastfeeding. It was just like my boobs were going to explode. So I ended up just like, the beauty of having like Wi-Fi on the plane is I was just obsessively looking for flights. And so I ended up booking one on Southwest and then canceling my Delta one. And just now I'm trying to get a refund.
Yeah.
Like, fuck you guys. I'm out of here.
Yeah.
It was just so, it would have been, I'm like, I just went to a funeral. I was so grief stricken as I got on that plane. And I just was like, I just want to be home and hug my daughter. And then it's like, and 5 flights. I was like, no. And luckily there was even a flight.
Yeah.
Ugh. And this is why the miracle of flying
gets lost,
gets dulled.
Yeah, for sure.
I still think it's a miracle.
It still is. Like the fact that you like went through a wormhole and basically were like in and out of Rhode Island in 48 hours, and 36 hours.
The fact that I could book another flight on another airline while I was in the air flying.
Right. Right.
Is also a miracle.
That's relatively new. Didn't used to be able to do that.
It reminds me of that Louis C.K. Like, you're in a chair in the sky. Like you're a god. You're a Greek god.
Yeah.
And he's like talking about how you can't bitch about something you didn't have 5 minutes ago. And people be like, oh, the Wi-Fi's down. But now we're used to having Wi-Fi on the flights.
Yeah.
And it's become something that I was like, thank God there's Wi-Fi on this flight.
I know.
How else would I be booking another flight? Screw you, Delta. But Southwest ended up saving me, and Southwest fucked me last time.
Right.
I mean, you're going to get fucked by all the airlines.
Yeah.
There should be a Pornhub parody. Of just Americans getting fucked by all the airlines. Tune in next week for another riveting episode that will change your life, help you get out of your own way, and solve all the world's problems. I want to thank our composer, Jared Elias, my co-producer and cousin, Maggie, and all of you out there listening. This has been Walk-Ins Welcome with Bridget Phetasy. I'm Bridget Phetasy, and you're welcome. It's the dumbest line.